What happens in the human mind when taking a life isn't met with panic, but with composure? When the moment of irreversible violence isn't followed by collapse, but by calm? In the case of Aileen Wuornos, the silence that followed her first murder wasn't confusion, it was control. Between 1989 and 1990, Wuornos shot and killed 7 men along Florida highways. Each killing carried its own circumstances, but what bound them wasn't just method, it was mindset. She didn't run, she didn't hide. In many instances, she returned to the road, to the same cycle with the same resolve. And that's where the psychological gravity of her case begins. Not in the crimes themselves, but in how she moved through them. Have you ever wondered what truly drives a mind like this? One that doesn't just commit violence, but absorbs it into its identity, silently, without visible fracture. Stay with me. The truths we are about to uncover go deeper than you might expect. Because what we find in Wuornos isn't hysteria or chaos. It's something colder, more structured, something that resists our expectations of what remorse should look like. Her behavior after the killings defied the emotional scripts we associate with guilt, fear, or even trauma. And that defiance may be the clearest window into how her mind truly operated. Let's begin by stepping into that first aftermath, into the stillness that didn't signal regret, but something far more unsettling. According to court records, after the murder of Richard Mallory, her first known victim, Wuornos didn't spiral. She pawned items, she continued traveling, and when questioned later, she described the moment not with fear, but with rationalization. "He was going to hurt me," she said. "I had to do it." There was no tremor in her voice, no sense of emotional fragmentation. The space between the act and the explanation was eerily clean, as if her internal world had already prepared for this possibility. That kind of psychological readiness raises deeper questions, not about motive, but about mental alignment. What kind of transformation must occur for killing to feel not chaotic, but correct? If you haven't yet, make sure you're subscribed to Criminal Psychology Unmasked. This channel exists to question, not to excuse, to analyze what others rush to label. And if you're already with us, take a moment to check that your subscription is still active. These are journeys meant to be taken together. Now, let's go even deeper into this, because what followed Mallory's death wasn't retreat or remorse. It was repetition. With each new victim, Wuornos seemed to settle further into the role she had carved for herself, not as a desperate woman, but as someone who believed she was acting with purpose. Whether that belief was delusional, protective, or fully conscious, that's where the real investigation begins. Richard Mallory's murder wasn't just the beginning of Aileen Wuornos's killing spree, it marked a psychological rupture. But unlike the expected trauma or visible breakdown, what emerged was something much quieter, much harder to trace. After the act, Wuornos showed no outward signs of distress. Surveillance footage showed her at a pawn shop, trading items linked to the crime. When asked about it later, she didn't hesitate. It was self-defense, she insisted. Her tone, flat, her eyes, steady. But something had shifted beneath the surface. A cognitive pivot where the boundary between violence and survival collapsed into a single, unchallenged decision. In forensic psychology, this is often referred to as a point of no return, not because the act is irreversible, but because the psyche begins to realign around it. For Wuornos, that transformation appeared almost seamless. The emotional weight that might paralyze others was absent. There was no visible regret, no delay in rationalization. The crime had been psychologically absorbed, filed away as justified. And in that absorption, something chilling emerged, the formation of a new identity, one that didn't merely accept what had been done, but prepared for what would come next. Now, let's go even deeper into this. The first kill often forces confrontation with moral fracture, but Wuornos seemed to experience something closer to confirmation, a validation of a worldview where trust was dangerous and preemptive violence was logical. That kind of internal narrative doesn't appear overnight. but once it takes root, it begins to write its own future. If this analysis sparked something inside you, leave in the comments. There's always a hidden layer. Now let's go even deeper into this. After the murder of Richard Mallory, Aileen Wuornos didn't retreat. She adapted. What followed wasn't impulsive chaos, but the formation of a pattern, a psychological structure she returned to with each new act. In her own words, during one police interview, she stated, "I couldn't take the risk anymore. They were gonna hurt me." That sentence, repeated in slightly altered forms throughout her confessions, became a kind of internal mantra. Whether the facts supported her claim or not, the narrative remained unchanged. She was defending herself each time against an imminent threat. This repetition is critical. In criminal psychology, it reflects the process of self-stabilization, where behavior that once required justification becomes identity. The more Wuornos killed, the more her perception seemed to shift. She was no longer a person reacting to danger. She became someone who anticipated it, assumed it, and preemptively responded. The transformation wasn't just emotional, it was cognitive. Her worldview narrowed into a binary, predator or prey, and in that binary, she could only survive by striking first. Court testimony from officers and psychologists revealed that even when presented with inconsistencies, Wuornos didn't flinch. Her story, her sense of purpose, remained intact. The psychological impact of that consistency isn't just in what it hides, it's in what it reveals. That she needed the logic to hold, not for anyone else, but for herself. The pattern gave her order, and in her mind, that order justified everything. But there's another hidden layer we need to uncover, one that doesn't lie in the violence itself, but in the choreography that preceded it. What happens when repetition doesn't erode guilt, but instead reinforces belief? When killing no longer feels like an exception, but becomes a continuation of one's internal logic? Aileen Wuornos did not act at random. Her choice of victims, locations, and timing reveals a calculated system beneath the surface of chaos. Many of the men she targeted were picked up while she was hitchhiking along Florida highways. She approached them with ease, a smile, small talk, the illusion of connection. But behind that, she was scanning, measuring vulnerability, assessing control. The complexity of this mind doesn't end in the act itself. It reveals itself in the preparation, in the quiet, methodical decisions that turned each encounter into a carefully staged opportunity. Investigators later reconstructed these sequences through receipts, pawn slips, and witness testimonies. What emerged wasn't impulsivity, it was preparation. One case in particular involved Charles Cascadden, a 40-year-old rodeo worker. After spending time with him on the road, Wuornos later shot him 9 times. The overkill suggests more than self-defense. It implies emotional discharge, and yet, according to forensic analysts, her behavior immediately after remained calm and focused. She disposed of his car, pawned his belongings, and moved on, as if following steps she had already practiced in her mind. This is where the predator's logic begins to take shape. Her choices weren't dictated by the chaos of her surroundings, but by an internal system she had constructed, one where she retained control by setting the terms of each interaction. Time, place, and approach became part of a personal script. The appearance of disorder was deceptive. Underneath, there was a mental architecture, methodical, self-justifying, and deeply rooted in a fractured identity. Now let's go even deeper into this, into the emotional landscape that followed each crime. Because when control is no longer sought through connection, but through domination, a different kind of transformation takes place. One where the mind builds safety not in trust, but in preemptive force. What stands out in Aileen Wuornos's journey is not just the repetition of violence, but the striking absence of internal conflict. In multiple interviews, she spoke of the murders with a tone that bordered on mechanical. They had it coming. she once told a reporter, her voice flat, her expression unmoved. There was no pause, no tremor, no visible hesitation. This wasn't simply cruelty. It was a deeper psychological adaptation, an emotional disconnection so complete that remorse no longer seemed necessary or even possible. The complexity of this mind doesn't dissolve over time. It sharpens, moment by moment, decision by decision, shaped by a logic not rooted in empathy, but in survival. After the murder of Troy Burress, a 50-year-old sausage salesman whose body was found wrapped in a carpet near Ocala, Wuornos didn't retreat or show signs of panic. Instead, she calmly pawned his belongings and continued traveling with her partner. Her affect remained flat, even when confronted with details of the crime during interrogation. When asked how she felt about the killings, she replied, "I'd do it again. I was tired of being hurt." The response isn't just defensive. It reveals a form of psychological insulation. Pain, both past and present, had been reframed as justification, and in doing so, it muted the emotional consequences. This level of detachment suggests a protective mechanism, one likely reinforced over years of trauma, instability, and perceived betrayal. In Wuornos's mind, empathy may have been more dangerous than violence. The transformation from victim to aggressor required a deliberate suppression of vulnerability, and within that suppressed state, she forged an identity that didn't mourn what she had done, but absorbed it. The complexity of this mind doesn't end here, because when disconnection becomes identity, the boundary between survival and destruction begins to blur, and the truth beneath it becomes even harder to reach. Aileen Wuornos wasn't entirely mute about what she did. In fact, she often spoke, but not always to those in front of her. Her interviews, court statements, and even offhand comments suggest the presence of an internal dialogue, a kind of ongoing psychological monologue, as though she were explaining herself not to the world, but to someone unseen, or perhaps to a version of herself she still needed to believe in. In one of her recorded conversations with law enforcement, she said, "They'd have killed me. They all would have. I know it. You don't get it, but I do." Her tone wasn't pleading. It was firm, certain, almost rehearsed. She wasn't trying to persuade the detectives. She was reinforcing her own script. Even during trial, when questioned about contradictions in her statements, she snapped, "You can believe what you want. I know what happened." That insistence on her version of events, regardless of opposing facts, points to a deep internal narrative, one built for preservation, not persuasion. This narrative structure appears to have helped stabilize her identity. With each justification, she carved herself further into the role she had constructed, not as a cold-blooded killer, but as a woman pushed to act. Whether that role was a shield or a distortion no longer mattered. It became her truth. And in that truth, she found not clarity, but consistency, a mental anchor. Now let's go even deeper into this, into the space not often analyzed, the silence between the killings. These weren't empty intervals. They were psychological recalibrations, moments when Aileen Wuornos retreated not to reflect, but to reinforce the identity she had been constructing with each act. The time between one murder and the next wasn't marked by hesitation, but by preparation, mental, emotional, and behavioral. When the mind must repeat its story to survive, it reveals not just a defense mechanism, but a deeper desperation for coherence in the face of psychological fracture. And that's where the most revealing layer of her psyche emerges, not in what she did, but in how she sustained it. The complexity of this mind doesn't resolve, it recalculates, and in its quietest moments, it sharpens. After the killing of David Spears in May of 1990, a 43-year-old construction worker, Wuornos disappeared for several weeks. But when she resurfaced, it was with the same method, the same cold execution, no evident remorse, no shift in behavior. During that time, she pawned items, spent money, moved locations. Witnesses noted nothing erratic. If anything, her demeanor was composed, even casual. This absence of emotional volatility in the aftermath is telling, not of calm, but of cognitive consolidation. What had been done wasn't being questioned, it was being absorbed. In a later interview, she said, "I know what I did and I'm not losing sleep over it." That kind of statement, delivered without hesitation, doesn't reflect denial. It reflects internal reinforcement. Each silence between the murders seemed to serve as a chamber for re-anchoring her narrative, a narrative that allowed her to move forward without psychological collapse, a narrative she could live with and kill with. The complexity of this mind doesn't end here, it deepens in the quiet. Because it's in the stillness, not the storm, where we often find the clearest expression of someone's truth, or the version of it they need to believe in. And for Wuornos, silence was never absence. It was strategy. It was control. It was something no one could take from her. If you found value in this journey through the mind of Aileen Wuornos, consider subscribing to Criminal Psychology Unmasked. Here, we don't seek to sensationalize. We seek to understand. Every episode is an invitation to look deeper, to question more honestly, and to explore what most prefer to ignore. If this reflection resonated with you, write below. There's always a deeper origin. Your perspective matters, and it helps keep this space thoughtful and alive. And if you believe that serious psychological analysis deserves more attention on this platform, a like helps more than you might think. But even the darkest patterns we observe today didn't emerge by chance. Every distorted thought, every fractured emotion has roots that stretch deep into the past. In the next episode, we'll step back into the early chapters of this story to uncover how this mind was shaped, layer by layer. I'll be waiting for you there.